When I say that everything went wrong for the Vancouver Canucks this season, I do mean
Everything!
the Canucks were the worst team in the NHL by a large margin, finishing 14 points clear of the second worst team in the NHL, the Chicago Blackhawks, and were the only team on the year to have a goal differential of minus 100 or greater. By contrast, the best team in the NHL, the Colorado Avalanche, didn't even have a goal differential in the triple digits. The Canucks were plagued by injuries, they suffered from horrible mismanagement, they traded away just about every one of their good players, and at the end of all of that suffering, they didn't even have the luck to end up with a number one overall pick in a draft that is said to have some incredibly high-end prospects. So now that the Canucks are locked into the third overall pick in the upcoming draft, what should they do this offseason, and are they even close to being respectable in 2026? It's time for another edition of Fix Your Franchise, and as always, we're going to start in the management section because the Canucks have a new general manager. Ryan Johnson was just brought in to succeed Patrick Allvin, and the Sedin twins are coming in as co-presidents of hockey operations, replacing Jim Rutherford. Ryan Johnson, ironically, actually played with the Sedins in Vancouver, but this will be the first time in the big chair for all three of these men. And I don't really hate any of these hirings because the Vancouver Canucks definitely need a philosophical change across their organization. And from the initial press conference, it seems like all three of these guys seem to recognize that they're going to make big changes. And for his part, Ryan Johnson has been a part of this organization on the executive side for the last decade or so. So it's not like he's just a complete noob coming into this position. While there was some initial uncertainty as to what they would do at head coach, the Canucks brass did make the move to dismiss Adam Foote as head coach of the Canucks and are currently still searching for the next head coach, although it does seem there's one very obvious candidate. Manny Malhotra is the team's AHL affiliate coached the AHL affiliate, the Abbotsford Canucks, to a championship last season. So I think he would be a very fine candidate, especially if the Canucks brass is in love with his son, Caleb Malhotra, who's projected to be a top 5 prospect and could very well be the pick there at number 3. But I do think that Vancouver has some other options if for whatever reason they don't decide to go with Manny Malhotra as head coach. Obviously, David Carl is going to again be one of the hottest young coaching names that is out there, but you also have some experienced vet coaches like the Bruce Cassidys, Craig Berubes, Jay Woodcrofts, and Chris Knoblochs of the world that they could look into. But me personally, I think that promoting Malhotra just makes sense. Looking at the final lines for the Vancouver Canucks, it is pretty rough, not only because they traded away so many people, but because so many key players like Thatcher Demko, Phil Hedl, and Derek Forbort were on IR. And that did give some of the younger guys like Liam Okren, Steve Buium, Tom Willander, and Elias Pettersson, the defenseman, to get some more big minutes, which is good for their development. But unfortunately, the Vancouver Canucks farm system is not among the best in the NHL. Their best prospect right now is Jonathan Makarimaki. Only has 3 points in 12 NHL games and is only a top 50 prospect, so the chances of him becoming a high impact player are relatively low at this point. This year's first round pick, Braden Coots, and had a really good year in juniors, but he's only considered to be a top 100 prospect, so expecting him to step in and take a big role next year is a little ambitious in my opinion. Even with those guys potentially stepping into the lineup, the guys that were on IR coming back, are the Vancouver Canucks going to be a competitive team next year? Well, the answer is no. Yes, the Vancouver Canucks do have two decent centers. Marco Rossi could be a second line center, and even though Elias Pettersson has had 2 terrible years, his history indicates that he could still play at least a second line center level, and Brock Besser is definitely a top 6 winger, but they don't have an elite number 1 center or winger, and those are 2 positions that are going to be hard to come by. On defense, Phil Peronic is pretty good. You can make the argument that he is a high-end number 2 defenseman and maybe a low-end number 1 guy, and they do also have some good top 4 defensemen in Marcus Pettersson. Steve Buium could become that if he continues to develop. Thatcher Demko is a number 1 goaltender if he's healthy, but he and Kevin Lankinen make up a strong 1A, 1B tandem, and that would be ideal for Demko, honestly, because he just has not shown that he can be healthy enough to start 45 or 50 games a year. So that means that if the Vancouver Canucks wanted to fancy themselves as a Stanley Cup contender next year, they need a number 1 center, a number 1 winger, and ideally a number 1 defenseman so that Phil Peronic can just have to play top 4 minutes. That's just basically impossible to do in one offseason, especially when you consider that they're not exactly flush with cap space. They got about $21 million to spend this offseason, though they don't have anybody major who needs a big payday that they would have to re-sign. Evander Kane should be gone, and honestly, I don't know if he plays again in the NHL with how big of a headache he is. The only guy who's projected to get significant money by AFC Analytics is Teddy Bluger, who would get just under $3 million a year to be a bottom six forward, which you can pay him or not, it doesn't really matter to me, and the other guys would just be depth pieces. Now, the Canucks do have 2 number 1 picks and 2 number 2 picks in this draft. With how far away they are in terms of the high-end talent that they need to be competitive, the answer for this offseason is obvious. They need to continue to shed contracts as much as they can and accumulate even more assets, ideally for the next draft. They already have 2 first-round picks this year, their own, which as I mentioned is number 3 overall, and Minnesota's, which is currently number 24 overall. As far as the big contracts the Vancouver Canucks could look to move and get assets back this year, I'm looking at Brock Besser, Filip Hronek, and Thatcher Demko. Yes, Demko has the injury history, but some team is going to overpay for goaltending. We saw Edmonton do just that. Besser and Hronek are still relatively young and on contracts that are kind of easy to absorb. For Elias Pettersson, as much as I would love for the Vancouver Canucks to trade him, I don't know with how his decline has been recently, whether anybody's going to take on that contract. And Marco Rossi is just young enough that I think that they would want to hold on to him. Marcus Pettersson could also be a guy that they look to move off in the summer. So the Vancouver Canucks are just basically going to accumulate assets and add players to the draft. So with the 3rd overall pick, assuming it goes according to consensus, which would be McKenna first, Stenberg second, Vancouver Canucks should take the guy that most people consider to be the 3rd best player in the draft, Chase Reed, the defenseman out of Sioux. Yes, I know the Caleb Malhotra homecoming would be a great story, especially if Manny Malhotra is brought in as the head coach. But Chase Reed is just the best defenseman in this draft, and a lot of people think that he could be a top 2 pick. So if he's sitting there for the Vancouver Canucks, honestly, I would just grab him. Of course, if Vancouver decides that Caleb Malhotra is just the 2nd or 3rd best player in the draft, go ahead and take him. Ditto if they consider Carson Carrolls to be a better defensive prospect than Chase Reed. It's really just take BPA, and that's the case as well at pick 24. Let's go ahead and take the best player available on your board. Now for next year, you're going to want to see those young players get some ice time. I know Lekaramaki and Coots are not considered to be high-end prospects, but you want to throw them into the fire at this point and just see what they're made of. Let them develop and get some big boy ice time. Next year is pure evaluation for the Canucks. You're again acquiring assets to use in the 27 draft as well, maybe to potentially make a move at an RFA next summer. Now, if you want one bold move that I think the Vancouver Canucks should seriously consider making this offseason, it's dropping an offer sheet, and not on Jason Robertson, but on Buffalo Sabres forward Zach Benson. Buffalo is actually kind of tight up against the cap, and I think somebody should take a run and try and pry Zach Benson away, who's been an absolute dog in the playoffs. Vancouver, once again, has 2 first-round picks and will be adding some more picks in the future, I think. And while I don't think Zach Benson is going to be your future number 1 center or number 1 winger, adding a guy who just plays that style and has gone through the same sort of rebuild in Buffalo is just a good idea in my opinion. I don't think Zach Benson would take a contract like that, but you gotta at least kick the tires and see if he would be open to it. But at the end of the day, the Vancouver Canucks are not going to be competitive in 2026-27, and they might not even be competitive in 27-28. They are in the midst of a full-on teardown and rebuild, which is honestly what they need at this point. Brian Johnson and the Sedins are the right guys to lead them on that rebuild, I can't really say, but it is the right direction to take. Ultimately, the Vancouver Canucks have got to get through the dark before they can come out into the light.